My name is Bill Cavanaugh. I'm the director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology here at DePaul. And I'm delighted to see so many folks come out this evening. There's food in the back, so please help yourself. Don't be bashful about getting up and enjoying the treats. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, let me just say a little bit about some of the upcoming events that we have. On Tuesday at 11:30 a.m., 11:30 to 1:30, we have a book launch by Matt Tan. Where is Matt? What? He's here. There he is. There's our visiting scholar from Australia. Matt Tan is going to be presenting his new book, which is entitled Justice, Unity, and the Hidden Christ. And he'll be there, so you might want to read it in the book form before it becomes a major motion picture. And Matt'll be signing autographs there as well. So that's Tuesday at 11:30. There's flyers in the back. A few other upcoming events. In April 7th through the 11th, we have our annual World Catholicism Week, and the theme this year is going to be Catholicism in diaspora, meaning migration. So people are coming from all over the world to talk about Catholics who are displaced all over the world. And then the Thursday of that week, we have a day especially geared towards students on spiritual practices. And then on Friday, a day on the sweatshop industry and some interesting speakers there as well. There are other events coming up, so please take one of the flyers at the back of the room. It's my great pleasure to introduce Maria Clara Bingemer, who is with us from Brazil, this time for the third time. She has masochistically always come in the dead of winter because you can only take so much of beaches and nice weather in Rio de Janeiro. She is the professor of theology at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, and formerly the dean of the Center of Theology and Human Sciences at the university. She's currently working on the Martyr communities that she's going to be talking about tonight, but she's previously worked on a project of mysticism and has a book that has come out of her research that she's done while she was here with us. I won't go through all of her accolades, but only to say that she's well published in many different languages and knows just about everybody in the church in Latin America. So if there's anything you want to know about the church in Latin America, Maria Clara. And she's delightful as well, so has become a good friend, and we've had an exchange, a fruitful exchange between DePaul and Rio de Janeiro. So please join me in welcoming Maria Clara Bingemer.
Thank you, Bill, for being here for this presentation. It's true, like for me, DePaul now it's my second alma mater. The first is the Pontifical University of Rio, but DePaul has a place in my heart, perhaps more than in my mind. Okay. I made a PowerPoint. That is a very frightening thing because I am absolutely not very skilled on that, but we'll try. Because as I am speaking about people, it's good to see the faces, the images are help to grasp what we are speaking about. And that's why I ask for your indulgence. I'm from a generation that was not very used to work with PowerPoint, and I'm learning slowly to do it. We're speaking of two communities, but we depart from the fact that make for us and for the whole West and the whole world those communities so important. On May 21st, 1996, a communiqué, a message, sent by the JIA, which is the Groupe Islamique Armé, the radical Islamic group, announced the death of 7 Trappist monks. The whole community of Notre-Dame de l'Atlas in the mountains of Tibhirine in Algeria. They were the prior, Christian de Chergé, which is the extreme right with the glasses, the Father Christophe Le Breton, the novice master who was also the poet, Brother Luc Dochier, who was a physician who took care of everybody in the community and out of the monastery too, Brother Michel Fleury, Father Bruno Le Marchand, who was there by casualty because he didn't belong to that community. He was going to Morocco and then, well, he was caught. Father Celestin Ringard and Brother Paul Favre Mihil. The monks were kidnapped on March 27, 2 months before. They were beheaded, and the JIA blamed the French government for not being able to negotiate the liberation of some Muslim prisoners in France in order to liberate the monks. 2 of the monks, Father Jean-Pierre and Father Amédée, survived because they were not found by the kidnappers in the monastery. They were sleeping in another area, so they escaped the kidnapping. The government found and the superiors recognized only the heads of the monks. The bodies were not found. On November 16, 1989, the Church and the world received with pain and surprise the news of the execution of a whole Jesuit community, the one running the Universidad José Simeón Cañas, UCA, in San Salvador, the capital of a small country named El Salvador in Central America. The murder was executed by the Batallón Atlacatl, elite troop of the Salvadoran army. On the occasion were killed the rector of the university, Father Ignacio de Curia, and 5 other Jesuits, Segundo Montes, Ignacio Martín Baró, Ignacio López y López, Juan Ramón Moreno y Amando López, who were at the residence, and 2 women, a mother and her daughter, Julia Elba Ramos y Selina Ramos, who worked in the service of the university and residence. One member of the community, the theologian John Sobrino, who were here at DePaul in 2012, survived because of being at that moment in Thailand, giving a theology course. Those 2 communities were religious communities, a model of Christian life found mostly in Catholicism, present at the Church since very early in its history. They were men who consecrated their lives to God with the vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. The Trappists, the Trappists of Tibhirine, had, besides those vows, another vow of stability, which attached them to the same monastery for the rest of their lives. The Jesuits make a special vow of obedience to the Pope for everything related to the mission. But being similar, they were different. One is a contemplative commission, the Trappists, contemplative community, the Trappists, and lives in the cloister, in the monastery. The other is active and isn't attached to anything but mission, which can be very diverse and global. Nevertheless, both knew a very similar death, a violent one because of the faith, and are considered by the Church as martyrs, which means witnesses. Martyr in Greek means witnesses. And even if they are not officially canonized by the Church, and that because of an attitude radically coherent with the gospel towards some political and religious problems of their time and historical contexts. So in this communication, we want to reflect on the configuration and the itinerary of those 2 martyr communities. First, we'll try to examine the characteristics both have, and we will pay special attention to the leaders of both communities, the prior of the Trappists, the bright and prophetic French named Christian de Chergé, and the rector of the UCA, the vast, brilliant philosopher and intellectual Jesuit, Ignacio de Curia. After that, we will examine the circumstances they lived, the time preceding their martyrdom, and the communal discernment they did about that. Finally, we hope to conclude what their life and their death can reveal as new and as challenging to our times and our Christian life. The Cistercian order of the, no, first a little word about contemplative life and active life. Contemplative life is a term used to indicate a life characterized by solitude and prayers. Careful distinction should be made between a life of actual solitude and prayer and that state of life in which everything is officially organized as to create an atmosphere of prayer and quietness. So, contemplative life is called for those people who want to live in solitude and prayer, but in community. It implies a cloistered existence in which, through the exercise of prayer, mortification, and work in some way connected with the cloister, everything is so directed toward interior contemplation that God easily and effectively penetrates the whole of life. The monks, those who are contemplative, not only pray, they work too. Mostly manual work, because the manual work, St. Benedict, who wrote the rule of the contemplative orders, the monastic orders, thought that the motto of the order, ora et labora, because with the manual work, the mind and the heart are more free to continue prayer. So the monks pray and work. The order, the active life is different. It's a life where prayer has a very important place, but which is meant to action. So Vincentians, the order who owns this university, is an active order of active life. The Jesuits are from active life. Different in this way, but united by the same Christian root. The Cistercian order of the strict observance is originated in 1098 when St. Robert of Milan, Alberic, and Stephen Harding led a group from the Benedictine Abbey at Milan to the wilds of Citeaux in the diocese of Chalon-sur-Saône in Dijon, France. These men were determined to seek God by following the rule of St. Benedict in its fullness, in its radically. Like all other monastic orders, after the Vatican Council II, the Cistercian order of the strict observance, and as it is now named, undertook to write new constitutions and statutes, a work which was completed at Holyoke, Mass, Massachusetts, in 1983. Trappists begin their day while it is still dark, at 3 or 4 in the morning, and end it around 7 or 8 in the evening. Several hours each day are devoted to the Opus Dei, the Divine Office, and liturgical hours and community mass. 4 to 6 hours are given to manual labor, to enable them to be self-supporting. The rest of the 17-hour days devoted to contemplative prayer, lectio divina, and study. The Trappists lead a strictly cenobitical life. Silence is held in high honor and prevails in their monasteries. A very simple diet excludes meat and encourages fasting. Simplicity, the Trappist characteristic virtue, marks everything in their life, a hallmark of their beautiful and very good taste. The Society of Jesus, an experience for modern times. The Society of Jesus is an active order, is a religious order of Christian brothers, popularly known as Jesuits. Here we see the general of the Society of Jesus with Pope Francis, who is a Jesuit too, was before becoming bishop. The order grew out of the activity of its founder, Ignatius of Loyola, and 6 companions, who at Montmartre in Paris in August 1534, bound themselves by vows to poverty, chastity, and apostolic labors in the Holy Land, or, if this later plan did not prove feasible, as it did not, to any apostolic endeavor enjoined by the Pope. The purpose of the society is the salvation and perfection of individual Jesuits and of the human race. Jesuit organization, manner of life, and ministries are all directed to fulfill this twofold aim. Official directives in these matters are contained in a body of writings known collectively as the Institute. They comprise chiefly pertinent papal documents, the Jesuit constitutions, and the spiritual exercises. both composed by Ignatius, the rules and statutes of general congregations, instructions of superiors general. Members are either priests, candidates preparing for priesthood, or brothers whose assignments comprise a very wide variety of ministries. Jesuits were not the first religious to distinguish themselves as teachers, but theirs were the first constitution to enjoin general education work as a regular task. Another innovation of Ignatius was the extension of ministries, excluding secular business and political involvements, to embrace all types of apostolic endeavors in all parts of the world, as long as they tend to the greater glory of God. The order's motto is there, ad maiorem Dei gloria. Ignatian spirituality, rooted in the spiritual exercise, has ever been that of the society, and it has had a profound effect on the development of modern spirituality. From then on, we could conclude too quickly that the two communities we want to study have nothing in common, one contemplative, with special rules of silence, hours to common prayer, penance, etc. The other missionary, up to the point that Ignatius says in the constitutions that the Jesuit who pronounced the last and perpetual vows should be dispensed, if the mission demands so, even of the daily prayer, although never of the exam of conscience. So is the fact of the brutal and violent death the only commonality they have, those two mystic and testimonial communities? Is their martyrdom only their death, or it includes their lives too? Or on the contrary, are they linked through a fine and deep process, through their lives as individuals and their life as communal body, and that is their deep and true identity? Does that identity approaches or separates the two of them? Let's begin with the Trappist community at Tibhirine. As a good contemplative community, the one in Notre-Dame de la Place is a community of prayer first of all. But different from many others, theirs is an enculturated prayer, a situated prayer in geographic, social, political terms, but also, and not least, in ecclesial terms. They are a contemplative community in an Islamic country. That makes a whole big difference. And that had consequences on the way they organized the monastery, the daily life, even the prayers. Prayer is an essential source for those monks, as for every monk, a reserve, a pillar. Like the same Christian de Chergé says, at night we take the book when others take the weapons. And the prayer has not a practical or visible goal to be stronger, to be nourished. The prayer is something free and gratuitous. As says the same Christian de Chergé, we pray to meet the beloved one. Prayer is an act of love. After the Council of Vatican II, however, many of the Catholic contemplative orders understood that their unceasing prayer and praise should be rooted in contemporary world, which was at that time, as it is today, in great spiritual revolution. So many monasteries start to become very conscious of having a ministry of prayer, not only in the middle of the church, but to be prayerful among other prayerful, among different and differences. And with that came the call to pray and learn how to pray, even in non-Christian countries, and even in places which showed hostility to Christianity. The Tibhirine monks have then been obliged to learn to pray together, not only a liturgy of common times of prayer, but to be a prayerful body, icon of the mystery of the Church, who pray together in communion of heart and mind, and pray together in the largest communion, the communion with those belonging to other religions. Especially for their community, this deep learning for prayer prepared them for the situation they would have to face and to live: insecurity, violence, persecution, and violent death. We see the process of discernment they live together would not be possible without a deep prayer experience. Through prayer, unseasoned and communitarian, they became really an offer to God, completely surrendered to Him, expecting all from Him and praying also for others, even for the enemies who threatened them. The main rule created by Saint Benedict in the Middle Ages was ora et labora. We have already mentioned that. Because in Greek world, the physical labor was considered the occupation of slaves. The human being truly free was devoted solely to spiritual realities Physical work was something inferior, left up to people who were not capable of this higher spiritual existence. But in Christianity, it was not like that. In the book of Acts, chapter 11, we find the time when the disciples were called Christians for the first time. They prayed in the church, but also worked, taught the word everywhere and at all times. That was the great intuition of Christian de Chargé, the prior of Tibhirine. He felt the call of being a monk, of praying, to be a prayerful among prayerful, as an apostolic work. When he arrives to Notre Dame de l'Atlas, the communion doesn't have a common vision about the sense of their presence in Algeria. The reasons which made each of the monks to live in Algeria were so diverse as the monks themselves. Life with the poor, attention to the sick, Brother Luke was that, spiritual service for Christians living in Algeria, monastic life in Africa, attachment to Algeria, very simple reality, more humble life, etc. Christian, nevertheless, had a very clear notion why to choose Algeria with a clear mission in mind, to live a spiritual presence in Muslim milieu. And he considers this as compatible with the motto of the founder, ora et labora. At the beginning, he was not very well understood by his brothers, sometimes, neither by the superiors of the order. He suffered his monastic call is not understood as an authentic apostolic vocation. And he's convinced, mostly after having spent 2 years in Rome studying Arabic, that the Spirit works more at ease at the grassroots. And he wants to go to Tibhirine to live that vocation. Some monks doubt Christian monastic vocation, seeing him a little too active, asking themselves if he wouldn't be better as a priest in the Diocese of Oran. They didn't understand very well his insistence in learning Arabic. Monks are not men of silence, high to know another language. And his interest by Islamic spirituality was not very well understood by everyone. But he had to learn how to refrain his impatience and his hurry. He was young. Every young person is impatient, wants to see results quickly. And to exercise his patience, there was nothing better than manual work at the apiaries and the oil mill and the hoeing lavender. And he witnessed that, writing to among his friends. It is a very exceptional joy to be able to surrender to such a boring work, having the spirit liberated by a verse of St. John. Slowly and progressively, Tibhirine community began to have a very clear and deep conscience that prayer and work had to be put together, and also that prayer and work in that context mean something different. They understood they have not only the work inside the monastery. Brother Luke worked the whole day, healing people, treating those who came, never refused one single patient, sometimes 100 patients by day, and he was 82. But also the work of a prayerful and active presence, open to the people living close to them, forming with them an enlarged community. To Father Christian, it is very clear which one is his vocation, to listen to Islam's spirituality, to share the spiritual life with them, to be a prayerful among the prayerful. What gives each one and the whole community strength to struggle in order to live this monastical ideal of prayer or work is the community itself. Like Father Christian writes, at the end of the day, the little miracle is this instability where each morning the community perpetuates herself. Some words about the personality of Father Christian de Chargé. Christian de Chargé is born in Colmar, France, Alsace, of a very good and aristocratic and well-educated family. He felt the vocation to be a priest very early and entered the seminar of the Diocese of Paris. During his formation years, he was sent as an officer to Algeria in the middle of the war. And there, his love for Islamic religion and for Islamic people began. Two figures draw him, already a child and a teenager, close to Islam. The first was his mother, who, seeing he observed the Muslims praying at 7 times a day, told him, I quote, "They pray to God. We can't laugh at them. They too, they adore God. Christian comments this fact years after and says, "Then I knew that the God of Islam and the God of Jesus Christ do not number. The other is Muhammad, a Muslim father of 10. As seminarian and military, he had a very strong experience of encounter with this man, who was a rural guard. Deeply religious, he knows he exposes himself because of being close to the French. Christian and Muhammad talked together a lot. Muhammad knew he was threatened in the violent situation of the country, and he asked Christian to pray for him, even if he said, Christians don't know how to pray. Christian says, I received this critique as a disapproval towards my church, which didn't present itself as a prayerful community. Then during a confrontation with radical Muslims, Muhammad intervenes in Christian favor and is killed after that. To Christian, this was the biggest proof of love, to give the life for the other. All his life was changed because of this encounter and this testimony of this man. He writes years later about this friend, saying, all this confused period stays crossed by a luminous ray, which changed my way of enlightening my life and lead it where I am. He will never forget his Muslim friend, inhabited by prayer, and includes him in the communion of saints, which overcomes the religious borders. It was a founding experience in his process of vocational discernment towards a positive relation with Muslim faith. He feels the call to monastic life, but firmly connected with Islam and Algeria. And he recognizes in the Eucharistic gift of Muhammad the gift of Christ himself. His vocation calls him to deepen into Christian prayer, but merging it with Muslim believers. When he finally is allowed, took a long time, to enter the monastery of Tibhirine, the monastery was poor, the community was frail, they wanted him to stay in France. Finally, he was allowed to enter. He brings with him all his previous experiences and desires. Engaging himself in contemplative life in Algeria, he imposes him a double exodus, which he qualifies as counter-nature. He goes to the country that just got free from France's protection and domination, and he goes towards Muslims in their way to search and find God. This is still very new at this time, the 60s and 70s. Vatican II just opened the doors of the church, recognizing in the Declaration Nostra Aetate that the Catholic Church doesn't reject anything that is true and saint in great religions. This is very new. The community of Tibhirine was finally the place where Christian could enter, and he thought this was a true miracle of communion. He expresses in front of the community the desire of establishing himself in Cistercian life in order to live there his particular vocation. The monks accepted his profession, and after that, 4 other monks come from France to make vows of stability in Algeria. Finally, he pronounces his final vows at this monastery, of which he says, that's the phrase I put there, this monastery is like the bride I chose, imperfect but unique. As prior, he is also the rock, the cornerstone of this group, which followed globally the prophetic intuitions of his presence in Islamic countries, even if he had a rough and sometimes severe temperaments and attitudes. He adopted a lot of Muslim habits. It was not so much pleasant for his brothers. During the Ramadan, he fastens, as his neighbors Muslims, from dawn to sunset, maintaining his regular work timetable and taking only the Eucharist. He says, Eucharist is enough for me. He follows also the tradition of taking off his sandals before entering the chapel, as Muslims do. But he also feels and suffers with the violence present in the country. How to make the monastery for which he is responsible a place of peace? This concern was always present to him till the end. He wanted absolutely the monastery to be a place of peace. 3 weeks before being kidnapped, he preached the retreat during which he left the following recommendation. Thou shalt not kill. Not kill yourself, not kill time, which belongs to God. Not kill trust, not kill death itself by trivializing it. Not kill the country, the other person, or the church. There are 5 pillars of peace patience, poverty, presence, prayer, and pardon. The murder of a group of Croatians close to the monastery, that is shown in the movie so beautiful, Gods and Men, affects the whole community very much. And the fact that death is given in the name of Allah brings, in the name of God, brings Christian suffering to the maximum. And when the Jihad, the group of Islamic army, comes to the monastery at Christmas Eve, Christian dialogues peacefully and firmly with the chief of the group. That is a confirmation of his vocation of universal brother, whatever the cost. It doesn't allow them to take Brother Luke away to take care of something, and he doesn't allow them to enter the monastery. The community is frightened after this visit and waits for any moment the terrorists to return. The prior convokes the whole group and listens to everyone. They arrive to agreement on 3 points: not giving money to the terrorists, stay together, not to put in risk the neighbors who work with them. The idea of living with the first intimidation and abandon the people who trust them so much is not satisfying for anyone. The Christmas visit inaugurates a different state of spirit in the community. In the free choice of staying, each one knows the risk. The community finds a grace of natural cohesion, but not without suffering a lot. And then more violence began to happen. The murder of many religious with whom the monks worked. And they feel the possibility of a violent death closer and closer. Christian reflects that it is the communitarian signal which is the targeted, together with the difference it expresses. Coherently, while the terrorist action speaks against Islam, the love of the prior for this religion only grows. Not in an alienated mystic feeling which projects itself beyond historic conflicts. He assumes also the facts. As for Christian, God is not strange to human history. He accepts the risks of this one. That is what gives force to his testimony. Is in the scenery of violence, of insecurity, the General Abbot, Dom Bernardo Oliveira, an Argentinian, tells Christian that the order needed monks, not martyrs. He made a profound silence and then answered, "There is no contradiction." After the facts, after the killing of the monks, Dom Bernardo comments, and I quote, "Today I see he was right. Monks and martyrs, the order, the church, the world, we all need faithful witnesses who speak words of blood from the inexhaustible fountain of the first love. We need followers of Jesus who are ready to follow him to the end, eager to embrace the cross of forgiveness that gives freedom and salvation. God has given us all of this in the persons of our brothers." The Testament of Christian de Chergé, which was distributed in the chairs for each one, is one of the most important spiritual texts of the 20th century, is surely the concrete demonstration that he had consciousness of his destiny and faced it in deep communion with his brothers and with his Master, Jesus Christ. But including in this communion all his brothers and sisters of Islam, who never left his heart. I go a little bit further. The community of Tibhirine is also a poor community, who lives in solidarity with the other community that is around the monastery. In the movie there are beautiful scenes about the contact and the dialogue they have with the poor neighbors. And they are regarded as so by the same community. Christian tells one day to the people of the neighborhood where they lived, "We are solidary of the Algerians, like the bird on the branch." And the young man answered, "You are the branch, we are the birds. If you leave, where shall we go? We have no more branch to be." So for them the solidarity and the service to the poor means something very serious and a joyful part of their commitment. And it was an important element of their discernment to leave or to stay when violence began to grow and to be more threatening. They felt they couldn't abandon this community. It was also a community of peace. The decision they took not to accept military protection was communitarian, an object of a vow. It was decided in a communal discernment and firmly stated by Father Christian to the mayor and to the army, and also to the Archbishop of Algeria. It was an engagement for absolute nonviolence. Father Jean-Pierre, when he tells the story of those last times with his brothers, affirms, and I quote, "The choice to be disarmed and unprotected by any armed security and measure or to escape to the city was made early in the process, as it was a shared decision of following the gospel, like lambs among wolves, our only arms being fidelity in charity and faith in the power of the Holy Spirit working in the human heart. Faith also in the goodwill of people who hopefully would see the confidence we deposed on them, leaving us disarmed in their hands and in such a dangerous place." After the kidnapping and death of the monks, there are no witnesses of this night. Father Amédée and Father Jean-Pierre saw only from far something very little, but they didn't saw the dialogue, the circumstances, the details of the kidnapping. But there is a state of spirit who certainly dominated the community when the kidnapping happened. And we can suppose that because the unceasing prayer that the prior advised the community to pray during the last months was, I quote, "Lord, disarm me, disarm them." We guess how much this simple and burning prayer must have mobilized the heart of the kidnapped monks. During those 2 months, they were kidnapped and finally killed. There are beautiful testimonies, as the one of Father Christophe, with great lucidity about the possibility of martyrdom, commenting what the mayor told them, that to stay would be a collective suicide. And he says, "The martyr is not a kamikaze or a suicide. We reaffirm our reasons to stay. We see we are at the junction between two groups who are in confrontation here and up to a certain point in every place in the West and Middle East. And more," he continues, "besides that, there exists something unique in our way of being church, how we do react to events, how we wait for them and live them in practice. It has to do with a certain awareness that we are responsible." This is very beautiful. It's moving to say that. Responsible not for doing something, but for being something here in response to truth and love. I see something about our particular way of being, which is Cenobite monks. It resists changing. It moves on. And he compares what he says with the Psalms, where the words speak of remaining and resists to change. Don Bernardo, the general abbot, says, I quote, "The decision taken by the Atlas brothers is neither unique nor isolated. All those who belong to Benedictine Cistercian tradition made a vow of stability. It ties them till death to a community and to the place where this community lives. Many communities of our order have faced war and armed violence during those last years and had to reflect seriously about the meaning of this vow and to take the crucial decision either to remain where they were, either to live. The 7 brothers of Our Lady of Atlas simply offered us the same testimony of love and faith as others. In each one of the cases, we are dealing with the grace given to a community, not to an individual person. In a Cenobite context, as the Cistercian monastery, the fact of a life lived and given in community is particularly significant. This communitarian grace of martyrdom will also be a grace from and to the church. We saw already the love of our brothers by the Church of Algeria and for the local Church of Algiers. Their life and death is inscribed in the register of all those religious people, Christians or Muslims, who lived and gave their lives for God and for the others. What their communitarian martyrdom shows, and that is the reason why they mark and seal so deep and durably the spirits, is that at the bottom, in silence and invisibility, the fire remains, and it challenges the ocean of tepidity and compromises where we live. There is a quotation by Father Christophe who says that the community was in a state of epiclese. Epiclese is that moment in the Eucharistic liturgy when the gifts are offered to God and wait for the Holy Spirit to come and consecrate them. So he felt, he was a poet, a writer, you know, he has this enormous sensitivity. He said, I feel we are living this state, this moment of epiclese, waiting to the Spirit to consecrate us. And God accepted their sacrifice. Let's now move to the other community that we are examining, the community of the Jesuits at the University Simeon Cañas. Ignatius Loyola was not illiterate when he experienced the presence of God and the discernment of spirits, and that changed him from a noble military to the pilgrim of the will of God. Nevertheless, he always felt inside him that intelligence is a key point in human creation by God, and that to develop intelligence is to contribute effectively for human beings to be more human, and so to give greater glory to God. That is also the reason by which he went, already in his 40s, to study at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris, always with the goal of serving better God. There he met his first companions and founded the order. When founding the Society of Jesus in the 16th century, Ignatius was very aware that its members would be poor and educated, pobres y doctos, it's the term in the constitutions, and that in order to teach others, that should be one of the main occupations the men formed by his spiritual exercises should work in. Intellectual apostolate then was present in the society since the beginning. One of the primary fields where Jesuits exercised their mission was in education. Since the first times of the society in Rome and during the life of Ignatius, for centuries they have advanced academic excellence in the service of humankind. Nevertheless, also from the beginning, education was taught by Ignatius as not only being a theoretical occupation, but also an instrument of formation. People who passed by the Jesuit schools and universities were called not only to teach content, but to form people in order to transform reality. The Jesuit schooling tradition was composed then essentially of three parts. First, the literary tradition based on poetry and prose of ancient Greece and Rome. Two, the philosophical and theological tradition based on Greek ethics, natural philosophy, and metaphysics. Three, both these traditions colored by the Western Christian tradition, in which spiritual conquest through conversion of the other was an essential component. Those three traditions constituted Jesuit tradition. They seem to be radically Western, and thus made so the Jesuit tradition. And they are built on solid ground, both morally and academically. It is important to take full account of the tradition's history, but not so much interested in history per se, as in how we can use aspects of it to the present. Those aspects are, in most cases, the deepest, and hence the more culturally transcendent aspects of tradition. This is the foundation of the Jesuit tradition of education, in that it is the reason by which Jesuits first decided to undertake formal schooling as a ministry, soon the first ministry of the order. The basic premise was that a training in good literature produced reflective individuals, inspired in their upright behavior, and was beneficial to society at large through dishonest, educated, and articulate human persons dedicated to the common good. What they found, the first Jesuits, was that universities were concerned only with two things. And here perhaps you laugh because it hasn't changed that much. Intellectual problem solving and career advancement through the acquisition of professional skills. That's what my university too. We always complain, a Catholic university should do more. Well, those are normally the basic goals of the university. Universities did not pay attention to the emotional, physical, moral, and religious development of the student, nor about the public good. In contrast, The humanistic style of education the Jesuits established was both radically student-centered, that is, centered on the student as human being, and was also concerned with the public will. The good human being would be a good leader in society and thus help develop a healthy commonwealth. That was the basic logic behind the humanistic program. The program was person-centered aspect of the humanistic philosophy of education that appealed to the Jesuits because it coincided with their person-centered religious program. Once they adopted the program, they too saw it as promoting the common good, even specifically civic good. With their ministry of formal schooling, the Jesuits then committed themselves to a civic, this worldly mission. Father John O'Malley, who wrote a lot, Emmanuel Colombo knows very well about him, about the first Jesuits, highlights 5 points about that. And I will pass by them very quickly. Humanistic education is meant to help students escape the confines of their experience up to the present to lead them to ask questions not only about their trade or professions, but about life itself. On an even more personal level, the study of literature reveals us to ourselves. 2, cultural perspective. Study of the past to understand the present, and at the same time to have a point of comparison with other cultures. 3, openness to others. We are not born for ourselves alone. 4, perfect eloquence. The study of literature, as Socrates said, 2,500 years ago. The proper use of language is the surest sign of sound understanding. And 5th, the spirit of finesse, to adapt and accommodate, to make wise decisions. It is important to say that for the Jesuits, an education institution has as its goal evangelization and as means education. So, education is a mean for arriving to evangelization. Evangelization is so the aspect of the tradition that made the Society of Jesus a global institution, because it was the Christian mandate to go make disciples of all nations that inspired Ignatius and his companions to found a society. They founded an order that was professedly and primarily a missionary institution. The broad horizon Ignatius gave to his Jesuits with the experience of the spiritual exercises and with the framework of the constitutions of the society gave them the freedom to find different ways of evangelizing. Education was one of the most important. That is why schools and universities were present since the beginning of Jesuit life, trying hard to combine intelligence and charity. I make this long introduction because this was the synthesis of the UCA project, the University Simeon Cañas in El Salvador. Ignacio Ellacuría received a university already turned towards the direction of the social context where it was inserted, and continued to promote this way of conceiving and leading this institution together with his community. In the 20th century, after the Second Vatican Council, began a new movement at the point of the global south, Latin America, where El Salvador is situated. And that was to have a critical position towards evangelization as it was made during 4th century, who only reached the elites, and also to propose a new program for the church, which has 3 points proclaimed and proposed in the Bishops' Conference of the continent level at Medellin, Colombia in 1968. And those are the 3 points. Faith and justice as an inseparable duo of priorities. A new way of doing theology with a method, to see, to judge, to act, the method of the Catholic action. A new model of church departing from the articulation of communitarian bases in poor regions around the Bible, desiring to be a church of the poor. Those points were confirmed in Puebla, in Mexico, in 1969, more than 10 years after, with specific names. The preferential option for the poor, which is a phrase of the general of the Jesuit order of the Society of Jesus at that time, Father Pedro Arrupe, liberation theology, and basic ecclesial communities. In 1989, all this movement received a very negative impact with the fall of Berlin Wall and the end of utopias. In this project, many Jesuits were very committed with the projects of insertion of communities inserted in the middle of the poor, Jesuit communities who no longer lived in schools or parishes. They worked in school or parishes, but they lived among the poor as they lived and with them. Others were committed doing this new kind of theology who had the poor as the center. According to Gustavo Gutierrez's definition, liberation theology is a critical reflection on praxis. Nevertheless, it is the same Gutierrez who affirms that liberation theology does not start or depart from a simple critical analysis of reality. It starts from a mystical experience, a deep encounter with the Lord in the face of the poor. In addition, it builds its system and discourse with this method to see, to judge, and to act. In an unjust and oppressive context, there can be no theology without the social analysis, seeing, which has afterwards to be confronted with the revelation present in the scripture, judging. And from those two moments has to emerge a transformative strategy that would inspire and guide the commitments and political positions of the Christians, acting. This theology, which departed from social analysis and praxis before arriving at reflection, was not meant to remain only in books and academic courses, but had to be given back to the poor to help them to put in action their liberation process. Liberation theology wanted to reinforce the struggles of the poor to build a new society and struggle with the poor so they can be subjects of their own history. After the council, in Latin America, the phrase option for the poor was first used by Father Pedro Arrupe, the former Superior General of the Society of Jesus, in a letter to the Jesuits of Latin America in 1968. And although the biggest stars of the theological thinking of this option, called further liberation theology, are the diocesan priest Gustavo Gutierrez and the Franciscan Leonardo Boff, the Jesuits were present and active as group, as community, as think tank, that made this theology spread all over the continent and be taught in seminaries and theology faculties. With the fall of socialism, neoliberalist ideology grew. Jesuit provincials in Latin America wrote a letter criticizing the system in 1996. It continued to grow. But this crisis helped liberation theology to make an autocritic too. Meanwhile, the differences between the North and the South remained the same and even increased. The crisis happened in the North, made things worse to the global South, and social justice was still a very distant and unattained utopia. The Jesuit provincials of Latin America wrote together with the letter against neoliberalism a document of reflection. In it, they expressed the desire of completely contribute to transform the reality of the society, creating conditions of possibility of fraternal conviviality for which the Jesuit martyrs gave their lives in many points of Latin America, it said in the letter. This is the point where we bring the case of the community of the UCA and especially of Ignacio Ellacuría, where one of the mentioned martyrs of the document and who can help us to better understand the challenge to the Church in the global South today. To understand Ellacuría's theological thought, which configured UCA's community and their action, it's very important to understand his work in the leading of the UCA. And that coincided with the full renovation in Latin American church and theology was having in these years when he assumed as a rector in 1979. Ellacuría's academic work was an important contribution to liberation philosophy. This school of philosophy stems from the work of Augusto Salazar Bondy and Leopoldo Zea. It focuses on liberating the oppressed in order to reach the fullness of humanity. Ellacuría was also a strong supporter and contributor to liberation theology. The political implications of his commitment to his ideas met strong opposition from the conservative religions and political forces in El Salvador. This opposition led to Ellacuría's murder by the Salvadoran army at his residence in UCA, along with 5 other fellow Jesuit priests and 2 ladies who worked there. But their murder marked a turning point in the Salvadoran civil war, because Ellacuría was a public personality, very conflictive, but very respected in the country. On the one hand, it increased international pressures on the Salvadoran government to sign peace agreements with the guerrilla organization. On the other, it helped making Ellacuría's ideas, until then known only in Latin America and Spain, become known worldwide. There are different types of Latin American liberation philosophy. Ellacuría's thought represents one of the streams within this philosophical tradition. He thought human realities is unavoidably personal, social, and historical. Biology and society are elements of history, which means that they are always in movement. But this should not be confused with historical materialism, which says human beings are passive instruments of the forces of history. It is very clear that Ellacuría is not a Marxist. No, he doesn't adopt as his the Marxist ideology, but he uses the methodology of Marxists to make an analysis of reality. Human beings certainly inherit constraints built in the past, but they always have the possibility to transcend them because of their intelligence. Praxis is the name Ellacuría gives to reflected human action aimed at changing reality. Unlike other animals who can only respond mechanically to stimulus from outside through intelligence and praxis, thank you, Francis, human beings have to realize their existence. Individuals in dialectic interaction with society have to make out what sort of ego to have by using their intelligence, and this implies transcending inherited constraints. This means that progress in reality happens through a combination of physical, biological, and practical factors. Through praxis, human beings are able to realize a wider range of possibilities for action. In other words, praxis can lead to a wider and more complete form of praxis. When this is so, praxis can be said to contribute to increased liberty if liberty is defined as greater possibilities for action. According to Ellacuría, the existence of people that are marginalized from society implies that history and practice have not delivered the wider range of possibilities for realization of every human being in the world. This situation has prevented these excluded people to realize their existence as human beings. Therefore, it is a situation that stands away from the fullness of humanity and the fullness of reality. But this situation can be changed. For him, before the evolution of humanity, the further development of historical reality took place only by physical and biological forces. But departing from the development of human beings, praxis can also contribute to realize historical reality. Since human beings have the possibility to reflect, it is philosophy's duty to exercise this ability to reflect in order to change reality and allow greater possibilities for individual realization. Ellacuría intended to build a new theology. He called it historical theology. By historical theology, he meant a way of making theology, to reflect about faith, departing from the historical present, and to reflect about the historical present, departing from faith. According to him, all theology is conditioned by its historical present. And historical theology intends to acquire conscience about its historical context and to incorporate it fully. The concept of locus theologicus is very important in this theology. Following Ellacuría's thought, then, liberation theology would be seen as a new way of doing historical theology, in a particular locus theological, the historical present of Latin America, where a large portion of the population is oppressed by structures that deny them the possibilities to satisfy their needs and to develop. It arises from the spirit of Gaudium Spes at the Second Vatican Council and the social encyclicals of Pope John XXIII, and more specifically, the Episcopal Conferences of Medellin in 68 and Puebla in 79. According to Ellacuría, salvation is accomplished historically, not only individually, but collectively. It is not just about liberation from, this is very important, it's not about liberation from evil, guilt, personal or social offenses, pain, disease, and fetishes. Those forms of liberation only start by liberation from unjust structures like slavery, political domination, psychology, and social oppression. But what makes Ellacuría a real case for the challenge that continues to be the work of the Society of Jesus and the whole church in the Global South was the fact of him being the rector of a university, and from there, from that locus, try to do something which could have appeal for the whole globe, north and south. The trail Ilha did about reality in his article, El Desafío de las Mayorías Pobres, the challenge of the poor majorities, published in 1989, preserves a throbbing topicality. His analysis reveals that this life system, the socioeconomic model, is seriously ill. The intention of his analysis is exactly to bring a reflexive line that avoids its fatal outcome. Because of that, he's a visionary, a utopian. He proposed to revert history, subvert it, and launch it in another direction, and to do it together with all the poor and oppressed of the world in a way that avoids all easy way of doing, utopically and hopefully. The Jesuit community of the UCA was a multidisciplinary one, who had in common a faith and spirituality. So Elia Curia could work with sociologists, psychologists. Ignacio Martí was a bright psychologist, and there was another, Lopez y Lopez, who worked in the grassroots with Fe y Alegria, that is popular education. So one of the most interesting of Elia Curia's proposition to this counter-direction of history is to build a civilization of poverty. It has to do with consumerism dictatorship and wealth civilization. To avoid misunderstandings, he explains his own terms. I quote, "The civilization of poverty is so called by counterposition to the civilization of richness, and not because it pretends the universal pauperization as a life ideal. No, everything has to be poor. No, it's not that. What we want to underline here is the dialectical relationship between richness and poverty in itself. In a world configured sinfully by the dynamism capital richness, it is necessary to raise a different dynamism which overcomes it salvifically." Elia Curia had the prophetic eye. Today we see that to the sinful socio-economical reality we live, configured by a system that bets for the profit at any cost, has been added the conscience, always clear, of the consequence of this system in the planet's devastation. The ecological crisis is not a distant ingredient, but an added consequence to this predatory process that's searching for an insatiable consumerism and producing an unlimited quantity of satisfying goods unsustainable because of their ecological trace, have finished by putting the human race at an undoubtable risk of extinction. And he had this intuition before, already in the 70s, in the 80s. Elia Curia said it was necessary to go back to the primary goods: adequate nourishment, minimum housing, basic health care, primary education, sufficient labor occupation. The great pending task is that all people can have decent access to the satisfaction of those needs, not as crumbs fallen down from the table of the rich, but as main part of the table of humankind. There are no doubts that Elia Curia is an intellectual, the same as the other members of his community, and a very bright one. One of his main contributions is in philosophy, in ethics. He has written an ethic of liberation. He worked a lot together with the famous Spanish philosopher Zubiri. His goal, it was to elaborate an ethics and a philosophy of history that helped to build the civilization of poverty, to launch history in another direction. To Elia Curia, this fundamental option has to be the option for the poor, because the fundamental option is not what the believer adds to the ethical act, which in itself is autonomous. It is a transcendental dimension of the world, meaning to say, a way of seeing things and reality very different from idealistic one, either Hegelian or Marxist. And therefore, this puts you in front of a new way of understanding history, and in consequence, ethics. Neither idealistic, neither materialistic, but realistic. Elia Curia expressed it very eloquently, his conviction in favor of the promotion of justice in educational apostolate. I quote, "A Christian university has to take into account the preference of the gospel for the poor. That doesn't mean that the poorest must be those who enter to do studies at the university. Neither that the university must give up cultivating all that academical excellence, which is needed to solve real problems that affect its social context. It means, yes, that the university must incarnate itself among the poor intellectually, the science of those who don't have voice, intellectual support for those who in the same reality have the truth and reason, in spite of sometimes as a spoliation, but who don't count with academical reasons that justify and legitimate their truth and their mission. The mission Elia Curia had in his hands after the year 1979 was to govern a Christian university. There he will try to do the best he could, living in that country, doing what he taught with his philosophy and what he believed with his faith and spirituality, to put intellectual formation and to put an institution charged of studies and intellectual contents at the service of the poor of the country of El Salvador. The ground of this praxis he lived and exercised in university were his spirituality, his faith and his spirituality, the spiritual exercises. The St. Ignatius shows the desire of salvation from God as a universal one in the meditation of the kingdom in the numbers 91 to 98 of the exercises. Christ the King calls all men and women, and each one in particular, to build the kingdom, to work with me to build the kingdom of my Father. But this universal desire to which the Christian, the believer is called, takes body and flesh in a very particular condition. The decision of the Trinity to sending the Son to redeem humankind is taken looking to the whole world with all those divisions which reflect injustice and violence and non-acceptance of difference. And the execution of this decision can be contemplated at the poor home of a poor young woman, anonymous and without any importance in the social scale, at the very last periphery of the time and space she lived, Mary, the mother of Jesus. That means that the universality expressed in the meditation of the kingdom implies a preference and a particularity. God wants to save the whole world, but beginning from below. He looks to the creation and sees where the problems are happening. Justice and peace are lacking. People are suffering. His preference is for those who are in distress and lack, and there the incarnated Word will be born, grow, and assume her public ministry. The poor and humble Christ of the spiritual exercises of Ignatius devoted himself to help the poor, heal the sick, feed the hungry, give vision to the blind, and make the crippled walk. Those are the signs of his kingdom. I have 5 minutes, so let me go into conclusion. Only to say that Elia Curia and his community was not only a philosopher that had bright thoughts, but also a man who lived the spirituality and made the synthesis between his spirituality and his intellectual work. The Jesuits knew it was dangerous to stay there, but they were committed with the people. They learned to love. They have lived Father Rutilio Grande's murder, Monsignor Romero's murder, the murder of 3 sisters, North American sisters, and 1 lay woman, North American lay woman, the murder of hundreds of peasants and catechists, poor men, women, and even children and old people killed with barbarian violence. They have read in the walls of San Salvador, Aga Patria, mate un cura, be patriot, kill a priest. But they chose to stay, to remain beside that people at whose service they were. The military have come the day before the killing, entered, revised everything, and went away without any subversive material. That night, the community thought they were safe and sound, that no one would molest them. The 2 women were killed because they didn't want witnesses of what they have done. The Jesuits were killed altogether in a circle. The next morning, the husband and father of both of the women found them and called the provincial to tell what's happened. Nobody knows very well the details of neither the killing nor the dialogue between the killers and the Jesuits. But what everybody knows is that they died because of they were and did, because of what they lived. And that was not the affair of the rector alone. The whole community died because of believing that another world is possible and struggle for it. At the end of this reflection, what is the message those two communities leave to us today? First, they were both revolutionary, each one in a proper style, but they were certainly countercultural. They lived in a way that was different from the usual model of religious community. Second, they brought something new about how living a consecration to God and to others. Both were dealing with novelties brought by the Vatican II and assumed by the whole Church, but that are only beginning to be practiced. Tibhirine showed the commitment till the end, till the blood, with interreligious dialogue. The Jesuits of the UCA showed the radicality of the option for the poor. So both communities were pioneers in options that the Church was beginning to live and were like the light that enlightens the way of others who come after. Third, both communities were inserted in a particular and concrete reality, but with universal openness. Their realities were Algeria and El Salvador, but this was a window to the world. In Algeria and El Salvador, they lived the Christian faith as it is proposed by the gospel of Jesus for every man and every woman who lives in this world. 4. Both communities accepted the challenge to stay in spite of the danger and of the threat. They didn't escape nor change their choice because of fear to take and bear the consequences of the choices. And then they were guided by the desire and hope that this would be of universal repercussion. 5th, both communities were sustained by a deep spirituality. The whole process they lived up to their death was prayed, discerned, worked in community, either ad intra as ad extra, within diversity and dealing with it. 6th, both communities wanted to bring peace in the middle of conflicts, injustice and violence. And their testimony is so, even if violence seems to have the last word. The future showed that their gesture, their word, their lives, their witness remain and wins against violence. 7th and last, both communities leave us some points of witnessing which can be lived by every person, every community, every Christian in any context. To be prayerful and non-prayerful, not only Christian, but of any faith or religion. To live simply among the poor and at their service. Not to react violently to violence. To face death in a certain style, the style of Jesus Christ, staying resilient under menace, praying and discerning the possibility of the martyrdom to happen, taking decisions to stay faithful to their commitment with death at the close horizon. Their martyrdom is a call of attention to what is essential, a testimony that surprised the world, a communal liturgy of life-giving for the sake of the glory of God and His kingdom. That is why those two communities teach us today simply and definitely a way of being human, a way of being disciples of Christ, a way of being church. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your Clara. We'll let you catch your breath there for a minute, but we have about 15 minutes for questions. So would you like to take questions, or do you want me to?
Yes, of course.
Okay, well,
if they want to.
yeah, great.
I'm
There's a
ready.
microphone. We're taping this, and there's a microphone here. So if you would approach the microphone if you have questions, that would be helpful.
I apologize for speaking so much, but the subject was dense, so it was difficult to stretch more than that.
I'll break the silence.
Very well, Mike.
So, just to pick up on what you said about the density of the subject, what I noticed is that as your talk unfolded is there was a lot more to say, and you had a lot more text to deal with, I think, with the Jesuits at the UCA in El Salvador than with the monks. And there's obviously a lot of reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
One is that Ignacio Yocuria was a philosopher, theologian, and so on, left behind a lot of writings. And another is I think it's your first love in many ways. But you know, I was thinking too, I had coming across something that Christian de Chergé said, wrote, or that I read about him, I can't place what it was, but he was not enamored with a lot of theology.
Enamored?
Yeah, you know, he
In love.
in love. He didn't think, he thought a lot of theology was just too many words. And, you know, and he mentions a couple figures, and he says, I'm interested in interreligious dialogue, but none of this academic type. So my question is just, if you have any insight over the difference, and Trappists are silent and so on, Jesuits always talking. But, you know, is there something there about the kind of just description of their life, which in some ways says enough? I don't know. You've been wrestling with both these communities and experiencing their life through the rustle of the page. What are your thoughts about this academic theology and then whatever it was the monks were doing and so on?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Mike. Thank you. Of course, I think there is more in quantity to say about Algeria and the Jesuits because, well, he's an intellectual. Is he someone who dominates the art of the word, you know, who makes speeches, etc. Christian de Chergé was a monk, but first, he was a bright theologian. His studies, everybody wanted him to continue and to become professor at the Institut Catholique. And he refused because he felt the call to the monastic life. He knew a lot of languages, so he was a very clever man. And he did, yes, a theology. But it didn't fit this talk because it's 1 hour. It's impossible. But he has, for instance, a theology of hope, which is very, very important. And I hope in the book, I hope to finish one day, started here, I will develop this more. Also, about the interreligious dialogue, he read all the predecessors, the masters, Louis Massignon, Charles de Foucault, those who inspired him. Also, he had a big devotion for this of this, what's the name? Bode Roger. So he was aware of all that. And also, his philosophy background was Emmanuel Levinas, the Jewish philosophers. Why? Because of the face of the other. This was very inspiring to him. And last but not least, he read every single day as night prayer before sleeping Etty Hillesum, the diaries of Etty Hillesum, and even gave the monks many pieces of this diary. It inspired a lot the community when they were close to be kidnapped and killed, because Etty Hillesum lived in an emergency state too. So yes, I think he has a different way of expression than Algeria and the university community, but he was a person of thought. And besides him, there was the Father Christophe Le Breton, that now he's being more and more studied, who is an entire writer, who is a poet, who is an artist, and who has beautiful pieces and pages about desire, about literature, about scripture as incarnation. So I think we have to go and drink of that well more and more, because they have precious things inside. Thank you for the question. Peter.
Great, thanks for a wonderful presentation. In the traditional understanding of martyrdom as odium fidei, hatred of the faith, for example, in the Roman Empire in the early centuries of the Church, in the martyrdoms that you have given us a contextualization for. It seems like martyrs of charity and justice. Carl Reiner's written on that. Would you say a few words about the expansion of the conception of the Christian understanding of martyrdom?
It's a very important theological point, and I thank you for bringing it. Because traditionally martyrdom is because of audium fidei. Yeah. And so Saint Tarcisius, who was a little boy who took the Eucharist and didn't have new times, secularization, modern times, conflict, struggles, began to have martyrs, people who, because of their faith, gave their lives, but not exactly because one point of the doctrine or the faith of the Eucharist or something like that, but because of the others, of charity, martyrs of charity. Monsignor Romero was a martyr of charity. And those two communities certainly are martyrs of charity. About the first one, about the monks of Tibhirine, John Paul II himself told the general abbot, yes, they are martyrs. Recognize it in an informal conversation, but recognize that they are martyrs. About the Jesuit community, the conflict is a little bigger because there were lots of political implications. But with the monks too. Because in Islam, who knows a little bit about Islam, knows that religion and politica are not separated, never. Like with Jewish communities, it's the same thing, it's a theocracy. So, the Jia, the radical Islamic group, were targeting the monks, not only because they were of other religions, because they disturbed the fidelity of the Muslim community. They were attracted by other religions, and that disturbs the whole Islamizing of the world. That is a political target too. So, but of course, the case of the El Salvador is more directly and evidently political, with political connections, mostly because of the personality of Ellacuría, who was a very articulate man, was always on the TV, and was always invited to be at public events, etc. But I have no doubt, not a single doubt, that they are martyrs, as Monsignor Romero was, as the four women, the three sisters and Jim Donovan. What are they? They are martyrs, of course. Jim Donovan was a North American girl, because it's a girl, 27 years old. She had a boyfriend, she was a fiancée. She had an apartment, she had a car, a very good job, and went to El Salvador. And when everybody was leaving the country because the situation was critical, she said, I can't leave those children, I'll stay here. And she knew a helicopter was following her because her father worked in a factory of helicopters. She went to see the American ambassadors, and she said, there is an American helicopter following me. And he said, no, there are no American helicopters in El Salvador. And she said, Ambassador, my dad works for a factory of helicopters. I know the model of the helicopter. I can describe to you. And some days later, she was killed. So I think that this is a martyrdom. This is witness testimony till the end. No? I have no doubt about it. I hope Pope Francis will erase the doubts of that and really promote the canonization of Monsignor Romero, at least the first, and then we hope the others too, because it's a very beautiful testimony, I think. Then people can identify themselves. And it reinforces also the communitarian element of being Christian, of Christian life. It is a little bit, I think, fluid today. We are very individualistic, so we think also theologically and spiritually very individualistic. And so to see a community that is together, that believes together, pray together, discern together, and die together, is very powerful.
We need to get Maria Clara some dinner. So thank you so much. Thanks for coming, and we hope we see you at some more of our events.
Thanks for coming.